All right, let's jump right in. We are about to tackle a huge topic, the entire history of Western philosophy. I'm talking about a journey that's over 2,500 years long, a quest to answer the biggest, oldest questions humanity has ever asked. So yeah, let's get into it.
You know those questions that just stick with you? Like, where did all of this come from? What is actually real? And how are we supposed to live a good life? Seriously, for as long as we've been around, we've been grappling with these huge ideas, just trying to make sense of it all. And that's exactly where our story kicks off.
So way back in the day, our first answers weren't science. They were stories, myths. The idea that the whole universe hatched from some giant cosmic egg, or that the world was created in this epic battle between gods. And look, these stories were great. They gave life a sense of order. But eventually a few people started to think, maybe there's another way to explain all this stuff.
And that little leads us to our first huge shift in thinking. This is where it all changes. We're in ancient Greece, and a real revolution of the mind is kicking off. People stopped asking who made the world and started asking something totally different, something way more fundamental. What is the world made of? And boom, just like that, philosophy as we know it was born. The folks who led this charge were the pre-Socratics. And you've got to understand, these guys were the original rebels. They were the first to say, hey, maybe the universe isn't just random acts of the gods. Maybe it follows rules we can actually see, think about, and maybe even figure out. They were on a hunt for the ultimate building block of reality, the one thing that everything else is made of.
Okay, so let's get into what they came up with. And their ideas were, well, they were all over the map. But they were all chasing that one big answer. You had Thales, who said, it's all water, obviously. It's the source of life, right? Then Pythagoras comes along and says, nope, it's numbers. Reality is basically math. Heraclitus was the guy who said, forget it. Everything is constantly changing. You can't step in the same river twice. And just to make things interesting, Parmenides flips the whole thing on its head and argues that change is totally an illusion. Only the stuff that never changes is actually real. Wild, right?
So, this whole debate about what the universe is made of was absolutely crucial. But it also raises another, maybe even more important question. I mean, what's the point of figuring out the cosmos if you haven't even figured out yourself? And that question right there, that kicks off our second act. We call it the human turn. This is where philosophy pivots, big time. It starts looking less at the stars and more at us, at our ethics, how we build societies, and what it even means to be a self. And this was happening all over the globe in different ways. In China, you had thinkers like Confucius who were focused on how to rebuild a harmonious society through relationships and traditions. Meanwhile, over in Greece, the big name was Socrates. Instead of looking up at the sky, Socrates was down on the streets of Athens, talking to people, and turning the spotlight on individual morality. His whole thing was getting people to question their own beliefs, to live what he called an examined life. He basically believed that knowing yourself was the most important thing you could possibly do.
And this era gave us some of the most influential ideas in history. You have Buddha in the East teaching that so much of our suffering comes from our attachment to things. Back in Greece, the Socratic tradition just exploded. His student, Plato, came up with this incredible idea that our world, everything we see and touch, is just a shadow of a more perfect real world of forms. Then his student, Aristotle, kind of brought philosophy back down to earth. He said, look, knowledge starts with what we can see and observe right here. And he argued that living a good life is all about finding a balance, a golden mean.
And this is a perfect example of how philosophy is like a giant relay race of ideas. Think about it. Aristotle's work from the 4th century BCE gets passed down for hundreds, even thousands of years. It influences major thinkers like Augustine and Aquinas, who blend his logic with Christian theology. And that chain reaction eventually sets the stage for the guy who's going to kick off the whole modern era of philosophy, René Descartes.
Okay, so let's jump forward to our third act. A new age of science is dawning, and it's causing a massive intellectual crisis. Suddenly, people are realizing that the old authorities, the church, the ancient books, might have been wrong about how the universe works. And that leads to a terrifying question. If they were wrong about that, what else were they wrong about? Suddenly, everything was up for grabs. They needed a new foundation for what was true.
And that became the question of the era. With everything they thought they knew crumbling, philosophers went on this desperate search for something, anything, they could be absolutely certain of. Imagine it. If you throw out everything you've ever been taught, everything you've ever read, what's left? What can you know for sure, just by yourself? And this is where René Descartes enters the story with a brilliant, radical idea. He decided to doubt everything, seriously everything. He doubted his senses, maybe he was dreaming. He doubted his memories, he even doubted that the physical world was real. But then he had a breakthrough. He realized that even if he's doubting, there has to be a him doing the doubting. The very act of thinking proved that he existed. I think, therefore I am. And for Descartes, that was it. That was the one solid rock he could stand on to start rebuilding all of knowledge from scratch. And once Descartes opened that door, other thinkers just ran with it in these totally mind-bending directions. You had Baruch Spinoza, who argued that God and nature are basically the same thing, just two different words for the single, interconnected reality that is everything. Then you have Gottfried Leibniz, who took a more optimistic route. He said, look, if God is perfect, then he must have created the best of all possible worlds. All the things that seem bad, they're somehow part of a perfect, rational plan. So you can see how this is all connected. Once you start questioning the very foundation of knowledge, it's only a matter of time before you start questioning the foundation of society itself. If power and authority don't just come from God, then where do they come from? And what's the best way for us all to live together? This line of thinking led to this huge debate about something called the social contract. Basically, why do we have governments at all? On one side, you have Thomas Hobbes. He lived through a brutal civil war and basically said that without a powerful ruler, life is just short, nasty, and brutal. A war of all against all. So, we give up some of our freedom to a king or a state in exchange for safety. But then John Locke came along and said, no, you've got it all wrong. He argued we're born with natural rights, life, liberty, and property. We create governments to protect those rights, and this is the key part. If the government fails to do that, we have the right to get rid of it. And then you get a heavyweight like Immanuel Kant, who tried to put morality on a completely logical footing. He came up with something called the categorical imperative, which sounds complicated, but it's basically a simple test for any action. Before you do something, ask yourself two things. 1, what if everyone did this all the time? Would that work? And 2, is my action treating another person like a human being with their own goals, or am I just using them to get what I want? For Kant, it wasn't about the outcome. It was about acting out of a sense of rational duty. But then Karl Marx comes along and basically flips the whole table over. He says, you guys have all been focused on ideas, but you're missing the point. He argued that history isn't driven by big thoughts. It's driven by the gritty, real-world conflict between economic classes. For Marx, if you want to understand a society, you don't look at its philosophy. You look at who has the money and who's doing the labor. This was a massive shift, putting economics and power right at the center of the conversation. And all of that brings us right up to our modern world, a world where technology is changing everything and fast. You see, this new digital landscape isn't just throwing new problems at us, it's making us ask those same ancient philosophical questions, but in completely new and urgent ways. I mean, take the 20th century, which really blew the doors off our ideas about identity. Simone de Beauvoir said something that just changed everything. One is not born, but rather becomes a woman. Her point was that so much of who we are isn't just biology, it's what society teaches us to be. It's a role we learn to play. And that insight, coming from existentialism and feminism, completely opened up how we think about identity, gender, and what it means to be free. Then, as media and screens started to take over our lives, a thinker named Jean Baudrillard came up with this wild concept he called hyperreality. It's this state where the line between what's real and what's a simulation just gets incredibly blurry. Think about it. We live in a world of social media profiles, brand images, and endless streams of content. The simulation, the image, the map, starts to feel more important, more real than the actual thing it's supposed to represent. And pretty soon, it's almost impossible to tell which is which. And that's just the start. Today, the philosophical battlegrounds are everywhere, and they're evolving at the speed of light. We're grappling with the ethics of AI. I mean, should a conscious machine have rights? We're fighting over what privacy even means anymore in a world of constant surveillance. We're talking about transhumanism. What does it mean to be human when we can literally upgrade our bodies? Heck, some people are seriously debating the simulation hypothesis, which is really just a high-tech version of Plato's cave, asking if any of this is real at all.
So when you see this number, 2,500 plus years, that's what it represents. It's more than 2.5 millennia of nonstop, relentless questioning. It's this incredible, unbroken chain of thinkers, each one standing on the shoulders of the last or trying to knock them down. It's a single conversation that has literally shaped the world we are standing in right now.
But here's the thing. That conversation isn't over. Not by a long shot.
After all that time, after all those brilliant minds, the baton has been passed to us. The responsibility to keep asking the big questions is now ours. So I'll leave you with this to think about. After 2,500 years of questions, what is the one question we need to answer next?